Welcome to this second chapter on the history of yoga. We will try to define together a few terms about yoga like Raja Yoga, Hatha Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga. All these words, what do they mean? What do they relate to? Is it part of the history of yoga? Is it a different style of yoga? We will also look at the different periods of yoga over the time. When did it start? Who invented yoga? How did it develop, evolve through time? And what is yoga right now in the modern time? And we will also look at the books that the ancient text, the classic text, traditional text that we will refer to all along this journey together. And maybe some of them you would like to start reading. But to start with, let's talk about Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. So yoga is a lifestyle. It's all about growth. And life is this classroom, this place where we are going through experiences. And how we decide to grow can be classified roughly into three types. The path of action or duty, and we also call it Karma Yoga, where the goal is to do the right action that is not right or wrong, but the rightest thing to do. So it goes beyond this idea of right or wrong. We then have Jnana Yoga, or the yoga of knowledge. Here, it's not only knowledge from books, from learnings, intellectual learnings, but it's also from your own experience, from introspection. So it's an inner knowledge, inner state, and really at the top of what Jnana Yoga is, it's the mastery of this condition that is given in each stages, each point or chakra that you go through in the journey of yoga. The third one is Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti Yoga can be translated in English by love or devotion. It's also sometimes seen as the emotional path. But beyond that, it's really about the feeling of connectedness with everything that surrounds us. It's also the spark and the enthusiasm into the path of yoga. So if those three paths have been defined quite clearly, and you can find them in the Bhagavad Gita described by Lord Krishna, we will look at them also how they play together and how right action, as well as the inner understanding of each state, as well as the fire of love, are actually playing together, and they can't be dissociated, so that we actually walk on the path of yoga. So what is Hatha Yoga? What is Raja Yoga? For that, I would like to take you over the history of yoga on the timeline itself. And first, we're going to look at the different periods of yoga, how they are classically defined. You will find them in books. So the history of yoga is divided into pre-Vedic period, then the Vedic period, the pre-classical yoga period, classical one, then post-classical, and at last the modern period. Now the time frame for these periods is difficult to define. In the ancient times, in the history of India, unfortunately there was little that was written down, and the oral tradition was the most important, from the master to the disciple, from the guru to the shishya. And because of that, even this character as Sage Patanjali were not exactly able to know when he was living in India and when he recorded the Yoga Sutras. But these are roughly the important periods in the history of yoga. It starts much before 1500 BCE, and you can see that the period between 500 BCE and 500 CE is mostly in the classical period of yoga, and much later in the Middle Ages, 15th to 17th century, is actually the time for post-classical yoga, which will be important to us. Let us look now at the books, the texts that define these periods. They are very important, and we will quote only a few of them, the ones that are important that we will refer to during this course several times. The first one are the Vedas. What's important about this this mass of knowledge is that these information were not given in writing. They were received by the sages, the rishis, as inner knowledge, some revelations coming from inside. And for that, they are called as shrutis, which means which is heard. So the sound heard by the inner ear, those rishis were yogis, was transformed into knowledge, and these made the core of the text of the Vedas. Now these Vedas are essential to understand yoga, and you will see that in the modern times as well as in all the periods of times, references are given to the Vedas. So they are, we can say, the base foundation of the history of yoga. Pre-Vedic time, we know that yoga already existed, and there are proofs carved in stones, in caves, that there was asana performed, and the art of yoga was already alive. So after that comes what we call the epic, so after the Vedic times comes the pre-classical time. And this is the time of those two great epics of India, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So just to have an understanding of what those two texts means, they are the embodiments of the philosophy, the principles of the Vedas into two characters that we can relate to, because they go through life, there's an entire story, and they help you to imbibe the values upholded in the Vedas. So these two characters are Rama and Krishna. So both of them are incarnation of Lord Vishnu. You need to know about the tradition of India and all these characters that will come again and again. And Rama is the perfection of the human being, upholding essentially Dharma, So he's a prince denied of his throne, and who goes through some adventures that allow him and his brother to uphold, the standard, the values of human life. Krishna appears in the Mahabharata. Mahabharata itself is a very interesting word. Bharata is the name of India in Hindi. It's still the name of India in Hindi right now. And Maha means big. So it's about the history of the great India. And here we have in this story, that I invite you to read, or you can even find comic books or even TV series about the Mahabharata. It's greatly known by all children in India. So here you have a war quarrel between two clans who are part actually of the same family. They are cousins. One are the Pandavas, they're 5 brothers, and on the other side you have the Kauravas, the 100 brothers, and both of them are fighting for the kingdom. And this entire Mahabharata will end up into a war at Kurukshetra, which is the field where the war happened, where this book that everybody in yoga knows about, the Bhagavad Gita, was taken from. So the Bhagavad Gita is a part of the Mahabharata. And in the Bharata, you have the dialogue between Lord Krishna and Arjuna uh, on the battlefield, just before Arjuna is supposed to go and face his cousin, his master, his teacher, his uncle, all his family is on the other side, and he's supposed to kill them. And so he is pausing and wondering, what is this all about? And this is where Lord Krishna has to explain to him the goal of life, the idea of, the Almighty, the Atman, and what is the role, the Dharma, the role that he has to play in this play of life. In this chapter is also, you find also the definition of this Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga that we talked about. So you can read them in this chapter, read about this yoga in this chapter of the Gita. So these books are also a reference, and you will see that many of the books about yoga refer to these characters. So it's nice to know who they are and how they come into the history of India. So these two books are also a cornerstone of the history of India, and although there's nothing about asanas in this, in these two books, all the guidelines about the lifestyle and the values that we have to uphold to talk about yoga are already into these two books. Now, what are the texts that define the classical time of yoga? So classical means you're going to find the most important text of the yoga history. And this is where you find the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are one of the 6 schools of yoga, 6 schools, 6 philosophy, about what is life, what is the creation, trying to analyze the creation, nature, our own nature, and our purpose in life. So they are called the 6 darshana, which also means vision. So it's the 6 ways to look at life from a different angle and to explain life as a whole. The 6 schools of yoga, 6 darshana as they are called, are the theory of Sankhya, the yoga of Patanjali, Vaisheshika, Nyaya, Mimamsa, and the Vedantas. So these are 6 classical texts from the history of yoga that try to define, the philosophy of life. We will look particularly into some of the aspects of the theory of Sankhya in the next chapter. And we will study the 8 steps of yoga from Patanjali, Ashtanga Yoga, which means 8 steps. So Patanjali is often seen as the father of yoga, but as you can see, yoga was there much before him, and one of the other father of yoga that is named is Lord Shiva, who used to practice yoga and who has in the history of India, you can see that he has given this knowledge of India to his consort Parvati. So yoga exists much before. So what Patanjali does, maybe 500 BC, 400 BC, in that period of time, is that he combines all the practices that were known at that time and puts them into very short sentences where each word has a very important meaning. They are written in Sanskrit and they are called sutras, which means the thread. So the thread is this history that Patanjali is trying to tell us, sutra by sutra, with each word being a bead, a word full of meaning. And the way traditionally that these sutras were explored were first to learn them by heart. Second, to let them resonate in you and to try to imbibe their meaning. Now, from your own practice towards, elevation of your own condition, your understanding also changes, which allows those beads to open up and to show their real meaning, which allows a deeper and deeper understanding of what those sutras mean. So these yoga sutras are, were prevalent at that time, and they disappeared after the Middle Ages for some time, till they were, they resurfaced in the modern ages. That means at the beginning of the 20th century, where it became again, something that people were reading and exploring. And nowadays, it is translating in every languages. You can find a copy in your own language. And we will refer in this course and also in the higher courses with Heartfulness to the Yoga Sutras a lot. So it's a mind to explore, and if you are interested in continuing, you should get a copy of, there are many commentaries on the Yoga Sutras, and you should try to get a copy and start exploring these sutras. Now we make a jump in this common era and enter the post-classical period. This is also called the Tantric period of yoga. And Tantric should not have the connotation that we often give it in the West. Tantra means a text or a practice, a technique. So what happened? From the Vedas, where we have very high content, directly descended from the source, heard inside from the rishis and maybe not accessible to one and all. They are embodied in two stories, the epics, and now they are explored into philosophy during this period of the classical period of yoga. But still, it is not accessible to all, because Patanjali, you will see, he talks a lot about the mind and how our mind is playing. He's really the father of actually psychology, psychiatry right now. If you want to understand the mind, read the Yoga Sutras. So, and from there, people started feeling like, can we find something that is a little more palpable, accessible to all? Let's try to define techniques from the body, that body that is also sacred, so that I can have stepping stones into something that might be a little more difficult to access, maybe a little more philosophical. And that is, the part of the sixth darshana. So here comes the Tantric methods. So again, it means techniques. And in the books of that period, that period, starts really in the Middle Ages. All those texts are from the Middle Ages. They show us for the first time the definition, the descriptions of postures or asanas, which were not there at the time of Patanjali. There's no descriptions of physical practices like asanas. He talks about pranayama. He talks about the fruits of, doing these steps that we will talk about. The description of it in the book comes in three classical texts. They are Shiva Samhita, the Geranda Samhita, and the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Those three books form really the knowledge of Hatha Yoga, because they are practices. They define asanas, mudras, bandhas, pranayama, kriyas. So all these practices to purify the body, to get the body into shape, into a lighter version of itself, so as to help the mind to settle and to be able to grasp the higher practices that Patanjali talks about. So in this way, if you follow me well, what is Raja Yoga and what is Hatha Yoga? Raja Yoga existed much before the Ramayana itself. So we are before, the epics, it's in the pre-Vedic period. We say 72 generations before the Ramayana. So there was a rishi who was wondering how to find a way towards realization, the highest goal of human life. Means, how can I unite with myself, with a capital self, S. And he found, this transmission that we talk about in heartfulness. Unfortunately, so he's the father of Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga existed at that time. Unfortunately, this art of transmission was lost. Raja Yoga itself is very well known by Patanjali, who defines his 8 steps of yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, in outer practices which are also developed in Hatha Yoga, and inner practices that are part of Raja Yoga. So at that time, when we talk about yoga in the classical period, we talk about Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga. So Hatha Yoga practices are more about physical practices or mental practices that allow you to step. They are stepping stones into Raja Yoga, which are higher practices where the tool is really meditation. So in the Tantric period, what we find in these books are practices that belong to Hatha Yoga. But in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, it is very clearly said that these practices lead into Raja Yoga. So they are not an end in itself. And asanas are only a little part of it. So we can see how asanas are not at all the central point of yoga. The point of yoga is still to refine ourselves. It's not at all about the physical exercise. It's about a way of life, a way to unite yoga. Now let's step into the modern age of yoga. And here you have names that you need to read about or have heard about. Because all these people are at the base of this renewal of yoga, not only in India but especially in the West. And the first one I would like to mention is Swami Vivekananda. So Swami Vivekananda is known, to have brought the concept of the Vedas and yoga, the ideas, that are carried by this philosophy of yoga to the West when he went to the Parliament of Religions in Chicago and addressed the people of America and brought a new idea of what the East, the Eastern philosophy could bring to the West. So he made quite a lot of disciples. And from then on, we could see, Westerners coming India in search of what Vivekananda had started spreading in the West. And then other, Indians came to the West also to spread yoga in their own way. At the same time of Vivekananda, this Theosophical Society started to come together with Westerners and in India, especially in Chennai, establishing society that tried to bring all the religions together. There was really this idea of union that you have in yoga. And one of the person you can watch and hear, speak is J. Krishnamurti. So he was very much related to yoga and speaks about yoga a lot because he studied it. But here we are not in the asanas and practices themselves. It's really the philosopher that you should listen to. It gives a nice perspective on yoga. So the other masters that I would like to bring to your attention to understand the current, modern scene of yoga and the schools of yoga that you can find all over the world now. The first one is Swami Shivananda Sarasvati. He is, he's the father of two very important schools in India. You'll see that there are many yoga schools in India, and I'm going to touch only upon a few. So they are classical, they are also found in the West, and they have given a lot of disciples and yoga teachers. Swami Shivananda Sarasvati had for disciple two people. One is Swami Satyananda Saraswati, who is the father of the Bihar School of Yoga. And the books I also recommend that you have in your library. They are easily available and they are a mine of studies. They studied a lot the effect of the yoga practices from the 60s onwards. So that's one school. The second school that comes in this lineage has been founded by Swami Vishnu Devananda. And here you have all the Shivananda schools that are available in Europe, in US, and all over the world. So this is one lineage under one of this great person that lived at the beginning of the 20th century. The second master is T. Krishnamacharya. So T. Krishnamacharya, there are many people who studied under him who have formed their own schools of yoga with a very specific style. First one I want to bring to mind is Indra Devi. She was a lady foreigner who went back to US and brought with her this fashion of doing yoga for all the Hollywood stars. So Hollywood stars started practicing asanas under Indra Devi, who had learned from T. Krishnamacharya in India. So again, a nice spread of the art of yoga from India to the West through this person. The three other people who studied under him were one, Pattabhi Jois, and he's known to have founded this Ashtanga Yoga school in Mysore. Many people have studied under him. So it's the style of yoga is Vinyasa Yoga, and here we speak about Hatha Yoga and asanas essentially. Then you have BKS Iyengar with their Iyengar style of yoga, which is a therapeutic yoga essentially. And then you have TKV Desikachar. His initials are the initials of his father, T. Krishnamacharya. So he was the son of Krishnamacharya and established a school of yoga based that does also teaches yoga especially for different bodies, so it's a therapeutic yoga also on its own. And he established this in Chennai in India. So these form now the some of the big schools of India, of yoga in India. So these form some of the known schools of yoga in India abroad. But it's very interesting to see that they are all, the masters of these schools really come together at the same time in the history. So they are born at the same time and spread the message and have the disciples at the beginning of the 20th century, so 1930, 1940. And nowadays, so what we know about yoga is essentially transmitted by these masters. So the third person who is born also at the same time is the first master of this heartfulness style of yoga, His name was Ramchandra. He lived in Fatehgarh in North India. And he is mostly named as Lalaji in his books. And if you read his books, which will be in the references that we offer you to go through, you will see that he talks about the Vedas, about Patanjali Ashtanga Yoga. And with him and his disciple, who was wearing the same name, Ramchandra, or most known as Babuji, affectionately, they established the practice of yoga, which is really based on the 8 steps of Ashtanga Yoga with an emphasis on the higher practices of meditation, the Raja Yoga practices. So we can say that heartfulness, while it's born at the same time, carries, not the Hatha Yoga part like the other schools, but more the, the Patanjali part, starting from the values, the yama niyamas, into, finally pratyahara, those steps that we will see together. So the emphasis in heartfulness has been put to meditation and higher practices, but they are not excluding the other practices that we will see have been defined by Patanjali. So as you can see in this journey through yoga, through time, these components of yoga were well known, before, in pre-Vedic times, so really ancient history. And yoga has transformed itself throughout the ages, keeping in mind that yoga is a lifestyle where man, try to find its position in this creation and try, through his journey through life, to reveal itself, to unite with the self, the capital S. So after setting the stage with you, going through time and showing you, a panorama of what yoga has been through time, I would like to invite you through this course to go into the practice and the science behind the practice, so that you know what you are practicing and how to practice it, and experience this beautiful journey to yourself through yoga.